If you've explored Wisconsin's wetlands, you've probably come across one of two tall birds, the sandhill crane or the whooping crane. Sandhill cranes were on the brink of extinction just a century ago. Now, there's over 100,000 of them, and nearly half call Wisconsin home. Studying this rebound has helped the International Crane Foundation also restore the whooping crane's population in North America. However, they're still an endangered species with about 800 of the birds in the world. For this month's Chirp Chat, Lake Effect's Xcaret Nuñez spoke with Ann Lacey, the director of the Eastern Flyway programs for the International Crane Foundation. She explains the challenges cranes face and what the ICF is doing to help.
Thank you, Anne, for joining me here today for this, sixth episode of Chirp Chat. I'm so excited to be here with you in Baraboo, Wisconsin. It's my first time ever. What makes this place so great for cranes?
It just happens to be that one of our co-founders happens to be from Baraboo. But this is also the middle of sandhill crane habitat. So it's really perfect to showcase the family of cranes and to have examples in the wild, literally right down the road in the case of whooping cranes and sandhill cranes. So there are only two species of 15 that exist in North America. We have them both right here in Sauk County.
That's amazing. And you mentioned earlier that there are two crane species here in Wisconsin. Can you tell me a little bit more about the sandhill crane?
The sandhill crane is the most numerous of the 15 crane species in the world. They exist throughout North America, down into Mexico even, and technically they're an Asian species too, because some of the birds that fly through the Central Flyway go all the way through Canada, across Alaska, across the Bering Sea, and nest in Siberia. So it's a long way. That's a really, really long way. So there are multiple flyways for sandhill cranes. And here in Wisconsin, we have the eastern population, and ours migrate generally southeast. They can go all the way to Florida, but often will stop in Indiana or Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia. There's probably 1.5 million sandhill cranes occurring in North America. There's over 100,000 sandhill cranes in the eastern population, so the ones that come through here in Wisconsin and breed here in Wisconsin. And of the eastern population, maybe not quite half of that population is resident in Wisconsin.
Wow.
So this is definitely the breadbasket of cranes in Wisconsin. And famously, Aldo Leopold wrote a marshland elegy in, the 1930s. And he thought that he was going to see the demise of the sandhill crane in his lifetime. And luckily he did not. It was already starting a very, very slow recovery even before he died. But I kind of wonder what he would think of the sandhill crane population now. Because probably more sandhill cranes now in Wisconsin than there were, pre-European settlement and, the transformation of the landscape. But sandhill cranes are generalists, and so they really took to prairies being converted into agricultural lands. And it's either luck or good foresight to keep many of our historic wetlands. Wisconsin has about 50% of its historic wetlands. And of course, cranes are obligate wetland nesters, and that really helped with the recovery as well. So.
Can you tell me about ICF's efforts and how they helped recover sandhill crane populations?
By the time the International Crane Foundation started in 1973, the sandhills were well on their way to recovery. So it was really a focus on other crane species worldwide that were in grave danger of going extinct, the whooping crane being one here in North America, but there's other crane species that at that time we really didn't even know the status. We did want to study the sandhill crane because it helped inform us about other species, but because a species, crane or otherwise, is doing well, that doesn't mean that we should be like, okay, we're done. We can ignore this now and we can move on to something else, because you turn your back and something might happen, something that would cause a decline in the species. And species like cranes that are long-lived but slow to reproduce, once it starts a decline, what caused it has been happening for long enough that it might be too difficult to stop that momentum. And so that's why I love that we are studying the sandhill cranes here in Wisconsin, because we do not want that to happen again.
Is it true that people here dress up as cranes to help maintain populations?
Well, they do dress up as cranes. For our whooping crane work, our aviculturists here and in other captive centers that we work with, we don a crane costume, but it is not to look like cranes. It is to cover the human form. And so on one arm, they have a crane puppet, and that looks like the head of a whooping crane. And that's really what we want the chicks that they're raising to focus on. And so that is very specific to reintroduction, because we don't have enough whooping cranes in captivity that can raise a whooping crane for release out into the wild. And the birds, of course, in the wild, unfortunately, are not self-sustaining yet. So we need to raise birds in captivity and keep amending these populations until we get to a point where they are self-sustaining. And a good way to do that is to raise many chicks at once with human caretakers. And we don't want them to imprint on people. So when we put them out in the wild, they act like wild birds. And they do. So it's kind of weird. But it is really ingenious. And that just kind of really makes a great point about the ingenuity that it takes to recover a species and the lengths that we go to. You know, famously, these birds were taught the migration route from Wisconsin down to Florida by an ultralight plane. That is really some creative thinking, and it absolutely worked. And now we have birds that are flying all the time, and we can release these birds that we raise now into the company of adult birds to follow down and learn that route.
How many whooping cranes would you say are in Wisconsin?
Yeah, we have about 70 now in the breeding population here in Wisconsin. And that we call them the Wisconsin population, but a couple of young birds are in Minnesota, and I think 2 might have wandered over into South Dakota. But that's because they're young birds, and they'll be back and migrating through. But yeah, we have a lot of nesting birds still here in Wisconsin.
What are some challenges that sandhill cranes and whooping cranes are facing in Wisconsin today?
The biggest challenge to our Wisconsin population is themselves and the crop damage that they do. But we helped a manufacturer develop a deterrent to keep cranes from damaging sprouting corn seeds, because they will go in and they will pluck out the corn seeds as they're sprouting. And they can do a lot of damage to a cornfield, and that's an economic hit that doesn't matter good times or bad. It's not good. And so we helped develop this seed treatment, and it works. It's very effective. It takes that one thing off the menu. You know, cranes, again, are omnivores, and we just don't want you eating that one thing. You can eat the bugs and the waste grain, and there's tons of other things in a field for them to eat. It's also very, very difficult to convince a crane that they don't want to be there. If it's a territorial pair, especially with a chick, they cannot go anywhere. Non-breeding flocks, which can do the most damage, they're kind of meandering about the landscape, but you also don't want to scare them away and make it a problem for your neighbors or another field that you own. And so a lot of the work that we do, just knowing cranes and their ecology really helped inform this effective solution. But thinking specifically to whooping cranes right now, the biggest hurdle is figuring out the impediments to them breeding successfully. There's lots of reasons that a young chick would not make it. There's disease issues. Again, genetics, you never know when a bad gene is going to rear its head, and they just literally have failure to thrive. But we have a lot of predators here in Wisconsin, avian and mammal of varying sizes. And so right now that is still our biggest hurdle is figuring out what is keeping the wild population that is established in Wisconsin from breeding. We have a lot of pairs that are well established. They nest year after year, and they can't quite seem to have their chicks survive the 100 days it takes to fledge. Once they fledge, then the survival probability goes way up, because of course they can fly away from things, and it just makes them a lot safer. So that's a really big focus for us right now.
There is a legislative study that's about to happen, and you were recently appointed to the council.
I was.
Can you tell me a little bit about this?
This study committee is just for this fall. It stems pretty directly from the crop damage problem. So maybe as a result of the issue with sandhill cranes and crop damage, and it's very obvious that we have a very robust sandhill crane population in Wisconsin, they are hunted elsewhere. So why can't we hunt them in Wisconsin? There's a management plan. We could maybe have a sustainable hunt. And the farmers. We need to help the farmers. So that is a very years and years and years of discussions and hunting proposals coming up in the legislature, and never going very far. So it's finally come to this, that this legislative study committee was created to look into this, to bring all parties, and it's not even two sides, there are many sides. There's the agricultural side, there's the ecological side, there's the birding community, and the hunting side. This is a resource that means different things to all of those sides. And so I think the study committee, hopefully, that I did apply to be a part of, and very thankful to be on it, I'm hoping that the study committee will finally put, here's all the facts and the figures. The population is very healthy at, maybe even 40 to 50,000 resident in Wisconsin alone, but again, over 100,000 in the entire population. Cranes are not deer, they're not geese, they're not ducks. The ecology of this species is very, very different from other hunted species. And the fact that this is a breeding area for sandhill cranes is something that I believe is not well known outside of the crane ecology world. And I think that is one thing that I really want to have deeper discussions about with people. And so they know that hunting a species that is not very numerous, and especially, and we're talking not very numerous in comparison to other waterfowl, is not good. And because these birds are long-lived but slow to breed, that is really key. And there's a lot of information that we need about this population. So to me, it's a very, very big issue. Thinking about all of these different sides and how everybody is impacted, and how to please everybody, that's not ever possible. But to try to do what's best for the cranes, that's my job as I see it. So I'm really taking this slow and thoughtful.
Absolutely. Well, and at the end of every Chirp Chat, I asked my guests to highlight a bird, in this case, a crane.
Oh. So when I'm asked what my favorite crane is, I say, I don't have a favorite, but I do, of course. And it's the sandhill crane. That was my gateway crane, and it's my favorite one. But since I have been working at the Crane Foundation and had the distinct pleasure of working with other crane species in other parts of the world where they exist, I have such a special appreciation for the blue crane. And here's the crossover special. The blue cranes that we have here on site are raising a sandhill crane chick.
Oh my gosh.
So they're extra special right now. And so it's just wonderful to watch them be new parents and raising a sandhill crane chick.
Well, let's head over and check them out.
Let's do that.
So, and we are here at the Blue Crane exhibit. We are keeping our voices a little low because who do we have nearby?
We are so close to Periwinkle and Howard, and they are our male and female blue crane pair, and they are meandering through the lovely prairie plants in their exhibit, looking for food items for their little chick that they're taking care of. And I can't believe how close we are. It's so precious.
And who's the little chick?
The chick is Calypso, and Calypso is a sandhill crane chick. But when it hatched out of its egg and was placed in with Howard and Periwinkle, they didn't know that it wasn't their egg. They had been sitting on an egg that was infertile. So we're encouraging this pair and their parental activities, and so that's building their confidence as a pair, in hopes that someday they will have a fertile egg of their own. But part of that was we happened to have a sandhill crane egg here on site that was fertile, and the timing was right for hatching for these guys, and we knew that practice makes perfect, and practicing with a sandhill crane is acceptable. So they will be parents and are teaching this sandhill to be a crane But so it doesn't learn to be a blue crane. Calypso will be moved later this summer to a sandhill crane enclosure, so it will be able to hang out next to a real sandhill crane. And eventually it will go to another captive center where it will be an ambassador for his sandhill crane species someplace else.
And can you tell me a little bit about the blue crane? They, of course, are not native to Wisconsin.
Not Wisconsin, not North America, not the Northern Hemisphere. These are found in South Africa. They're the national bird of South Africa. And they inhabit a lot of the drier agricultural lands in South Africa. Beautiful, beautiful landscape is where these birds live, in a much drier landscape than we would be accustomed to, and that is reflected in their bill. Their bill is very short compared to a lot of other crane species, so they are specialists more on smaller insects rather than digging up tubers in expansive wetlands.
I was going to say, can you describe what a blue crane looks like to our listeners?
They are definitely that slaty gray, which is where they get their name blue crane. And their other claim to fame, in addition to being the national bird of South Africa, is they are the only crane species of the 15 that don't have any red. And people who may know cranes, red means something to cranes. So famously, both the sandhill and the whooping crane have that red head. And they use that to communicate to their species. So their head is kind of poofy. It almost looks like the head of a cobra. They can expand the feathers out to make their head look big. And so that's what they use to communicate instead of that red head. But maybe my favorite part of the blue crane is when they're standing, it looks like a tail, but it's really their tertial feathers are very, very long and extravagant. And so it looks like they're wearing a coat with tails.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining me on Chirp Chat. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that you came and saw these cranes to enjoy with us. Thank you.
Ann Lacey is the director of Eastern Flyway Programs in North America for the International Crane Foundation. She spoke with Lake Effect's Xcaret Nuñez for a monthly series we call Chirp Chat. At WUWM.com, you can hear more of this conversation and find last month's Chirp Chat all about spark birds.